live in Dallas?
North side of Avenue, Mulder Avenue Street.
Okay. And does that neighborhood have a designation, is it a nickname or something? What do they call that neighborhood?
Maple Block.
Maple Block? Okay, and, is that a safe neighborhood? Is it a dangerous neighborhood? Did you go to school here in Dallas?
Yes, I'm flying out here.
Where was the last school you went to?
T.J. Russell.
T.J. Russell.
T.J. Russell. And
Could you pull that microphone a little bit closer, because Coca-Cola has to hear it and I have to hear it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, have you been diagnosed with ADHD, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Did you get any treatment for that in DISD?
I'm not sure. I didn't get patients today, but I think so.
Okay. Did you leave school in the 8th grade?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, was that because of stuff going on in your household?
Yeah, living circumstances.
My thoughts?
This, I've been working from home. And I started going to school, and I never went there.
Did you run away from your parents?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you start living with your Aunt Rita?
Not immediately, no.
Okay, did she take you in though ultimately?
Yes, ma'am.
So how long were you a teenager on the streets?
That was 2 years.
Never got arrested?
No, ma'am.
Never got in trouble?
No, ma'am.
Did you get hurt?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell the judge what happened to you while you lived on the streets? When you got hurt? I didn't even make that a big.
This type of things on like.
Did you get stabbed?
Yes, ma'am, I got stabbed and I'll be drunk at the time.
And have you been shot at?
Yes, ma'am.
So, how old were you when you were living on the streets?
13.
So you had,
13.
oh, 13.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, tell us about Aunt Rita. How do you know Aunt Rita and what's your relationship?
I grew up believing that she was my aunt. She was actually my neighbor, my mom's close friend. So I grew up calling her Aunt Rita. And I grew up believing that she was my aunt. That's how she's been here.
I think a lot of families are like that. And so she treats you like you're her nephew,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
And she's been very helpful to you while you've been incarcerated, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And does she have any children?
Yes, ma'am. 3.
3. And is Samaya one of her children?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the youngest one?
Yes, ma'am.
And, how old was Samaya on December 30th, 2022, if you remember?
12 or 13.
12 or 13. Okay. Now, does Aunt Rita give you spending money from time to time?
From time to time, yeah.
Okay. And then you live at her house?
Yes, ma'am.
And she feeds you?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, directing your attention to the 30th day of December 2022, very late at night, did you decide to go to get a soda?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, did Samaya want to go?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And could Samaya have gone to this store by herself?
No, it was against the house rule.
Okay, tell us what the house rule is.
We got a curfew. It's 9, 10, it depends on what the case may be. But the girls, after the street lights come on, they're not allowed to leave that house.
It's a slightly dangerous neighborhood.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it common or uncommon to hear gunshots around that neighborhood at night?
Very common.
So, about how far away is this store, the Cool Zone, from where you and Smiley were living with that Rita?
Maybe about a block.
Very
Block
close.
away. Yes, very close.
Have you been in and out of that store a few or many times?
Many times.
There's a couple of other stores in the neighborhood. Why do you pick this particular store if you have a reason? It appears to be clean and well cared for, right? Okay. So that night, you and Samaya just took what would be a routine run to the kill zone, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Is anything unusual about that trip?
No, ma'am, not at all.
Had you ever had any interaction with Mr. Bajrami?
No, ma'am.
Have you seen him before?
Yeah.
Because he's there a lot,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Okay. So, but you hadn't had a problem with him in the past, have you?
No, ma'am.
Have you ever had a problem with those people in the past?
No, ma'am, not at all.
Okay. So, I mean, we've seen it several times. You and your sister went and got some merchandise and brought it up to the counter, right? But what we can see is kind of from a distance. Can you tell the judge what happened when you came up to the counter?
Okay, well, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I went to the counter to pay for things, and I guess we didn't see the soda that was on the side, so I was asking him about it, and it turned out to be more than I expected it to be. So I told him, don't worry about it. I proceeded to pick up the cake that my person she put on time. I picked it up, and I was asking him about it, and he was just gradually getting more and more irritated with me. I don't know why.
Okay.
And he eventually snatched out my hand, and from then on, it became the argument.
Okay. Can I activate these strings somehow? How do I do that here?
Here you go.
Shows you how rusty I am. All right, let's see. I want to go to. Let me show you. Ronna,
Yes,
how about that?
you may.
I need to get this marked. Ronna, I'm going to offer what has been marked as defense exhibit number 1, which is excerpts from the video provided to me by the state.
Is there any objection?
No, that's not.
All right, defense exhibit number 1 is submitted for all purposes.
I'm going to show you some excerpts of what has been marked as defense exhibit number 1. This is a view. This is a view of the counter from behind the counter. Approximately 9:17. You're seeing you come up to the counter. Does this look familiar to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is this a discussion about the cost of things?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's he pointing to? You did ask for a cigar, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
But you couldn't get one because you don't have ID.
No, ma'am.
Oh. Are you smiling?
Yeah, he was angry. I didn't take it serious at the time.
Damn, what you right there, you make a gesture like this. You remember that doing that?
Yes,
What did that mean to you?
ma'am. It really mean anything at the time.
Well, whatever it is, he pulls out and threatens you with a golf club at that point, right?
Yes, ma'am.
But you didn't punch him in the face or anything.
No, ma'am.
You didn't try. You
No,
just
ma'am.
doing that. Okay. All right. So after you did that, what did you do subsequent to that? Do you remember what you did next? After he was telling you to get out?
She told the story.
Okay. You know, you seen the video where you take the pan? Do you remember doing that? Okay. Do you remember why you did that? I mean, because they think you're just trying to steal it, right?
No. Well, yeah. I hadn't thought about the fact that I didn't pay for it, so I just leave it with the can.
But it got slapped out of your hand.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was well within the store.
Yes, ma'am.
And then after it got slapped out of your hand, did that hurt?
Yes, ma'am.
Because it gets your hand off the can, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you did one of these slapping motions. You punched him, you slapped him on the back of the, on the side and back of his head.
Yes, ma'am.
And then what do you remember happening right after that?
Immediately, I see Jason towards the guy with the red sweater. And immediately after I saw him, I just see an increasing amount of bodies rushing towards me from behind me. Kind of panic.
So you went out the door?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you backed out the door?
Yes, ma'am.
And you continued to back out?
Yes, ma'am.
And did they continue to advance?
Yes, ma'am. They did.
What were you thinking?
I didn't know what to do.
You never went forward towards them, they always come toward you.
Yes, ma'am.
And you always backed up.
Yes, ma'am.
Step out of your shoe, back up,
Yes, ma'am.
were you scared?
Yes, ma'am.
You continued to back up, and ultimately they caught up to you and started hitting you.
Yes, ma'am.
So tell the jury, tell the judge about what was going through your mind when that happened.
Well, at this moment, I don't know what exactly to expect. You know, I just see a lot of grown men rushing toward me, and they're all screaming, and they're all like aggressive. So it was a hostile situation. I didn't know how to react to it. I'm standing there, and I'm trying to leave, but I know I can't exactly leave because my little cousin, she's still there. So I'm trying to figure out what to do. And on top of that, the guy with the red sweater, he's trying whatever he has to come at me. He's trying everything he has to come at me. And the sword credit, he's like pulling him back. So I know I can't turn my back for 2 reasons. Yeah, like I used to my little cousin, and I know that he's coming at me.
Did you hear her say anything?
No, not at that
Did you
point.
hear her yelling?
Not at that
Not
point.
at that point. Okay, did you later hear her yelling?
Yes, ma'am.
So, was the guy in the red sweater, was he pulling on your clothing?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that.
It seems like as I proceeded to run away, he didn't want me to leave, so he grabbed on my clothing. So I kind of tried to slip him off. I was trying to slip him off, but he was the brother. He just had a strong lock on my sweater.
Was he, I'm sorry, was he trying to pull you down? What was your impression?
And so that's how I felt. He was trying to get to the ground.
Because at one point, he's almost on the ground tugging on you, right? And so, what do you think, if anything, is going to happen if they get you on the ground?
I was just I'm not gonna lie, at this point, when he's trying to pull me to the ground, I'm more so worried about my little cousin, which all I can hear is her screaming. She's an innocent woman, she was telling a little girl. I had never heard her scream for help. So as I'm hearing her scream for help, it was just, I didn't know how to react to it.
Could you see her or just hear her?
No, man, I could just hear her scream it out and scream things like, stop, get off, please.
And so did you know whether or not she was being attacked or she was reacting to what was happening to you?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know if she was being attacked or not.
I mean, had you ever been attacked by grown men outside of the convenience store like that?
No, no.
Did you expect that to happen?
No, no, no.
So this was a startling event, I think.
No.
And so, as you're struggling with these people that are pulling on your clothing and hitting you over the head, do you think that you see a weapon?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Tell us about it.
Well, prior to this, when everything was gone, the store clerk, he turned around and grabbed something. I didn't have enough time to identify what it was. I just seen a little stick.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know if he had put it back or not. So I just assumed that he still had it with him.
Are you talking about the metal stick that he threatened you with in the
Yes,
store? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
So, so you thought he might still have that stick
Yes, ma'am.
because he had something in his hand.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, do you have a clear and calm and thorough memory of everything that happened out there during those few seconds?
No, ma'am. Not at all.
But you remember snippets?
Yes, ma'am.
So, do you recall what was going through your mind when you decided to pull out the weapon that you had?
No, ma'am.
But do you remember doing it?
No,
How was your body positioned when you decided to reach for your gun?
my head tucked in my shirt. Like that.
Okay, so your hood had been pulled over your face.
Yes, ma'am.
You couldn't see
And my face is toward the ground.
because the hoodie's pulling your head down.
Yes, ma'am.
You couldn't see what was happening, but you were still being hit, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's when you decided to reach for your gun.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember where your gun was?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember what pocket it was?
The left pocket.
In the left pocket, and what are you right or left-handed?
Right.
So do you remember how you got it out of your pocket?
Yes, ma'am.
And is this when you shot yourself?
Yes, ma'am.
Because you were, what was that, because you were fumbling with it?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to see where you fired?
No.
And why were you firing?
I want to give my attackers a reason to stop, to leave it alone. That's all I want. When I'm firing, I understand that I'm in a public service place, so I can. There's gas tanks to my left, and further from the gas tank there's a freeway. There's
Did you
another.
really think about all that when you pulled out that gun, or you thought about that since?
I thought about this.
I'm asking about what happened then. If you, I mean, it's okay to say you don't remember. We understand that.
Yeah, I don't really remember. I'm trying to make sense of it all. It all just happened very.
So, did you know that you hit anybody at that time?
No,
And then, did the people that were fighting with you suddenly disperse?
yes, ma'am.
Now tell us about
I don't know exactly how it happened. I just know starting off when I came to, put my jacket over my head, everyone had left. But the store clerk, the initial aggressor, whom I feared the most, he was still there, coming towards me.
And how did you feel about that at the time?
I was scared.
And you were scared of him
Yes, ma'am.
because you didn't know what he had in his hand,
Yes, ma'am.
and you didn't know what he intended to do to you over and above what he'd already done.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, at the time that you fired, take it back a tiny bit. Back at the time that you fired that first shot, were you aiming at anyone?
Not exactly. I was kind of in the general direction.
Did you even see them at that point?
Yeah.
Okay, because they pulled your hood over your face.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're pointing the gun in the general direction of the people that are beating you up.
Yes, ma'am.
So you were aware that you shot the store owner?
Yes.
Okay. And then he left, and you collected your shoes. Come to find out, one of those things he was hitting you with was a shoe. Right? And what did you do then?
I left, went back home, tried to tune my friend's shot.
Did it leave?
It's more like it used to buy it.
And then you just, what was the condition of that apartment that you all were in? Were you getting ready to leave that
Yes,
apartment?
ma'am.
Plumbing didn't work, did it? So you guys had to go find a new place to live.
Yes, ma'am.
And were you all in the process of doing that?
Yes, ma'am.
So, did you stay there or did you go someplace?
I stayed.
And after his apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you leave that apartment at some point?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that.
Well, early in the morning, I'm not sure if it was early in the morning, I just know I seen the sun come up. I wasn't exactly sure what was about to happen next. All I knew that I didn't know bringing a lot of police and I didn't want to get arrested from my own leader, from my big cousin. So yeah.
And then where you got arrested there?
Yes, ma'am.
And you cooperated?
Yes, ma'am.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Meyer, I'm going to ask you some yes or no questions just to keep it simple. But if any of my questions don't make any sense, I want you to tell me, okay? Okay. So you went to the gas station and you were trying to buy a cigar but did not have an ID, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the clerk refused your service, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that made you mad, didn't it?
No,
It didn't make you mad?
no.
And so when you did this, and I'm gesturing for the record like a punch, you just testified that you did that for no reason? Is that right?
Not exactly.
You just testified that you didn't know what that meant to you, isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so that was the first thing that came to your mind to do, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so then, after you do that, the clerk pulls out a golf club from behind the counter, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And he points it at you and tells you to leave, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that makes you mad, doesn't it?
No, ma'am.
Does it make you mad?
No.
Okay, and so you turn around and you actually start getting mad at Keenan because he comes up to you and tells you to leave too, doesn't he?
Yes, ma'am. I can't say that I'm mad. I'm very patient.
You're a really patient guy, okay. And you just testified that you kept that gun in your left pocket, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, the truth of the matter is that from the moment that you were approached by Keenan, you had your hand on that gun, didn't you?
I'm not sure.
You watched the video from State's Exhibit 5 multiple times throughout this trial, as have we all, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so do you remember that your hand was on the gun from the moment Keenan approached you inside of that store?
What is it to do?
You haven't paid attention. Okay, I'll pull it up for you. And we'll see if this helps you remember. Okay, so here we are, and this is obviously inside the store, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And Keenan is telling you, Keenan is the person with the red sweater, and he's telling you to leave at this point, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so let's click through, and what is your left hand doing in this photo? Where do you have it?
Not right here.
Okay, and so we'll keep going. And so Keenan's telling you to leave, and that makes you mad, and so you do what? You grab a can that you did not pay for, correct?
Curly.
Okay, and so you're trying to leave with it, and Keenan, as we see, knocks the drink, which you were about to steal, since you didn't pay for it, out of your hand, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Keenan turns away from you and bends to go and get that drink. But that made you mad, right? So you punched him, didn't you? At this point, neither the clerk nor Keenan had physically touched you. Is that correct? You were the first one who made physical contact with Keenan, correct?
He touched me first.
Human touched the can that you were going to steal out of your hand, correct?
He touched my hand.
Okay. Because you were going to steal a drink that you had not paid for, correct?
It's, you can see in the video, they were talking to me about the drink, but I'm not even.
Had you paid for the drink?
No.
Okay, so in other words, when you were going to leave with a drink that you had not paid for, that would be stealing, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so when he stops you from stealing, that made you mad, didn't it?
Okay.
So when you were here punching him in the head, you weren't mad?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you were mad?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So then after that, Keeman doesn't hit you back, does he? He stands and looks at you, isn't that right? Okay. And at that point then, you can see that the clerk has now come from behind the counter because you've committed an assault against Keeman, and he tells you again to leave, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so he's pointing his finger in your face, telling you to leave, right?
Yeah.
And that makes you mad, doesn't it? Okay. And so then we see other patrons who were in the store who had not had any communication with you previously, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And to be clear, the two people who you see now on the TV, neither of them had talked to you before, correct?
Yes.
Okay. They hadn't in fact even talked to the clerk or to Keeman, correct?
Okay.
Well, you didn't see them talking to him, right? At any point? Okay. So here we see the clerk is pointing his finger, telling you to get out, right? Correct?
I'm not sure if he was telling me right at this point. It was kind of just him just, I don't know, screaming.
Okay. Screaming at you because you had attempted to take his hand and he was telling you that you needed to leave, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so, where's your hand again, Karen? What's your hand doing?
It's in my pocket.
Okay. And you were just testified that you didn't take a single step forward toward the clerk, that you were just backing away. But that's not true, is it? You stepped forward and you continue to try to hit the clerk now. Is that right?
No.
Are you looking at the screen? Okay, so at this point, you take a step forward and you try to hit him again. Isn't that right?
No, I'm in the process of backing away.
Okay.
When I tried to slap his hand out of my face.
Okay. So you try to slap his hand out of your face. And what's your hand doing? Your left hand.
Still in my pocket.
Still in your pocket where your gun is, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you back up. But what do we see you keep doing? You at this point punch toward the clerk again, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now at this time, Keenan, the red sweater, he has not hit you, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the clerk has not hit you at this point, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And now after that, the clerk comes forward to you and you do what? What's your arm doing here? You attempt to hit him again, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you can see here that your one of your shoes has fallen off, right? On the sidewalk.
No.
Okay. And so after you have now hit the clerk 2 additional times, Keeman begins to go after you, correct?
I didn't really try to do this.
And so it's hard to see in this picture, but at this point now, you've got Keeman. It looks like you're facing us, correct? In this camera.
I can't see it.
I'll keep going. You testified that your hoodie had been pulled over your face and that Keeman, the guy in the red sweater, had you basically on the ground, right? That's what you were just told your attorney, correct? And that's why you were so scared. But the reality of it is, you actually had Keeman and you continued to basically drag him across the ground. Isn't that right?
Trying to get away.
Okay. And when Keeman was on the ground being dragged, that's when Mr. Bomani ran over and was able to finally get up to you guys and started hitting you with your own shoe, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then we see that you pull your gun from your left pocket, right? And at this point, Samaya is standing close to you, correct? And to make sure I understood, your testimony was that you aimed in the general direction of the people for that first shot, correct? Okay. And that's when your right hand was locked onto Keenan in the red sweater, which you can see up here, and your left hand had the gun, correct? You were shooting with your left hand, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is the moment where you end up shooting Mr. Noguez, who is standing behind Keenan, correct? Okay. And again, your right arm, even after the shot, is still locked on Keenan, correct?
Incorrect. I don't remember ever latching on to King.
I understand that you're saying that you don't remember it, but I'm telling you to look at the surveillance video. In the surveillance video, we can see that your right arm is still connected to Keenan, correct?
I think what we're looking at is a test.
Okay. Then you said that everyone's scattered and that at this point you had no idea if the clerk still had that giant metal golf club in his hand, right? Okay. But you were looking at it. In fact, he picked up your other shoe that fell and threw it at you, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and we see you standing there looking at him for, I believe, a solid 3 seconds, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's when you get mad again, right? You're mad that he's throwing your shoe. Your own shoe at you, right?
I can't exactly say I was
Okay, you're not sure if you were mad. But you pick up the gun and you continue to point it and shoot it, correct?
yes, ma'am.
Again, you shoot, right? Twice to the clerk, who, per your testimony, you're unsure if he was carrying a golf club at this time. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And he leaves, and you were so scared that you walked away, but you had to come back for your shoes, right?
I was scared. I walked away to talk to my cousin.
Okay. And you came back for your shoes, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna have to object to the statement of representing the open answer. Let him to finish the answer he's trying to do.
Overruled as to that question and answer. You may continue. Cross-examination.
So you picked up your shoes and then you left, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now you did not go call 911 at any point, right? And you did not come back and wait to talk to police to let them know what had happened at the gas station, right? You didn't talk to any police at the scene, correct? And just now on your testimony, you were saying that, oh, maybe you were thinking about shooting at the gas can or at the highway, and your attorney said, well, that's what you've been thinking about since then, right? And we just want to talk about what you remember or experienced in that point in time, correct?
Ma'am.
And after you were arrested and speaking with Detective Bruggs, at that time, isn't it true that you asked him, I want to make sure I'm getting your words right, but you said, you think I should say self-defense? Isn't that right that you asked Detective Bruggs that?
Yes, ma'am.
And now you've had a couple of years to think about what you're going to say today, right?
I'm saying exactly what I said today.
I understand that you're saying what you're saying today, but you just testified that you've had a couple of years to think about this, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I think your words to your attorney just now were, you've been trying to make sense of what happened, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Because the reality of you getting mad and shooting off at a bunch of people is not justifiable, correct?
I wouldn't know. I'm not based on a lot.
Well, you were carrying a gun. Do you know that it's illegal to shoot people with a gun? If you're mad? I mean, you know you can't do that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you understand, as someone who carried a gun, that you don't just get to shoot it when you get mad, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you testified on direct examination that before this day you've never been arrested before, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But that's not exactly true, right?
Yes, sir.
You think that you had never been arrested before this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so a month before this occurred on November 29th, you had been arrested for failed ID?
Right. But that different. I asked him why he was being arrested. He said I was being arrested on people's time.
Okay, but you were arrested and ultimately charged with that offense, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I did have one more thing. You had said that you had testified about a little bit about how you'd grown up and how you had experienced witnessing violence. Is that correct? Okay, so you know that I assume that before this day you've seen people in a fist fight, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it common or uncommon for when a fist fight breaks out, other people to stand around and watch? Common thing. And you know that because you've seen that happen before, right? And you know that when people are standing around watching a fist fight, they're watching, they're not necessarily involved in the fight, correct?
Not necessarily. Depending on how close you are, it tends, where I'm from, it tends to mean that you're involved.
Okay. But you just said that it's not uncommon for people to stand and watch, correct? And not be involved, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to talk to you about State's Exhibits 86, 87, 88. You were shot that night. You shot yourself, correct? Okay. Now here we're looking at your injured thumb, correct? And that's on your right hand, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when we're looking at this injury, when we keep saying you were shot, this is the injury, correct? What we're looking at?
No, ma'am. It's actually on the back.
It's on the back.
Yes, ma'am. Or maybe in the middle. It's here.
Maybe it's in the middle.
All right, if you have a cell phone, you need to turn it off. I usually make the person leave.
It's not ours.
Who has a cell phone on?
But it's me, I don't kill myself. Sorry, guys. Well, I put it on silent. It's on silent. I'll pay whatever donuts you request, right? But it's on silent. So that's
No
fine.
donuts for me.
All right, sorry.
But Stella's birthday is Saturday, so you can bring her
I'll
some.
take it.
Thank you. All right. You may
What's on
continue.
silent? I guess it just begins to all the way.
Well,
Sorry.
I appreciate that. All right. You may continue.
But maybe. So we're looking at this, and we see a tear, and it's bloody for sure. Are you aware of injuring yourself if you're having to rack a gun? You know that can happen? Okay. And in fact, you talked to the detective about maybe it was just a graze, right?
Okay, Mr. Mayo, let's back up here. So this is just rolling.
That's all right. We've got all day. We've got plenty of time. No worries. Seriously.
I do have a
We're fine
case
on
that I
time.
know what Mulder had started. Okay. Okay, Mr. Mayo, I'm showing you what is camera 3 on the state on the defense exhibit number 1. Come out of the
This is after the event.
Oh, sorry. You have your hand in your pocket now, right? Your hand is over your left pocket, but your hand is not in your left pocket. Is that a fair description? Here where you're continually backing up. Right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I mean, if those are typical cargo shorts, that gun is way down the bottom of the pocket, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Way down towards where your knee is, yeah?
Yeah.
So you don't have your hand on your gun.
I didn't think so.
Okay, you had your hand,
You know,
like you do, you stick your thumb in your pocket. It looks like you got your thumb in your pocket.
Yeah.
Okay, so the district attorney asked you a question about getting mad at the clerk when he wouldn't sell you a cigar. But you made the hand gesture at the clerk after he grabbed something out of your hand, right? Was that, in your opinion, a rude thing to do?
No, actually, I thought it was drawing a line between two men. I was just asking that he show the same respect that I showed him.
Okay. So, you heard the clerk testify that you punched him at the window, but you didn't, did you?
Yes, I do know.
Okay. Now, you were interrupted, but you were trying to tell the district attorney that at the time that you stopped at the door with the drink, somebody was talking to you about that.
Yes,
Tell us about that.
they were screaming about that I had my head forward. And I didn't realize it. So before I even think to try to write my own, he slapped it out of my hand.
He slapped your hand,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Okay. So, when it was brought to your attention, that's when you turned around,
Yes,
because
ma'am.
you didn't pay for that.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, shoot. I better pay for it.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, but that guy get it out of your hand.
Yes,
So, while you might have inadvertently stolen it, you didn't steal it, did you?
good.
And you didn't have any intent to steal it.
Good.
You had money to pay for it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, we see that the security guard is wearing latex gloves. You're wearing latex gloves. He'd like to chew on them sometimes. It's a cat that's like a, people chew ice and stuff like that.
Yes, ma'am.
But kids were wearing those gloves around that season, weren't they?
Yes, ma'am.
All the guys were wearing them. Why?
I don't know exactly.
People were doing that.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Okay. So, you were asked a question about dragging Mr. Wise, the guy in the red shirt. He was getting dragged because he wouldn't let go of your clothing. Isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't have your hands on him dragging him? Did you? You did not have your hands on him.
No, I did not.
He had his hands on you, and as you backed up, he would not let go.
Exactly.
And he was pulling you to the ground or attempting to.
Yes, ma'am.
So it is not correct to say that you were dragging him. He was hanging on to you as you attempted to retreat.
Agreed.
Now, you were asked a question about the people who, when you see a fist fight like out in the neighborhood or something, is it common for people to stand around? That's a legitimate question. Is it common for people to come right up to the fight and stand right over it, or do they stand at a distance?
It's going to be distance.
So is it your perception that night that the 4 men were all involved in hurting you?
This man, no, I was screaming.
And so these men, the man that was shot and the other man in the striped shirt, they were saying things to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Like what?
I don't know exactly what's wrong. I was screaming. The time, it was an accident. So even if I do remember exactly what they said, I couldn't describe.
So they look like a Hispanic accent?
Yes, ma'am. A lot of different accents. I think this whole place.
So Mr. John, you had an accent.
Yes, ma'am.
And were they kind or unkind things that were screaming? So there was menace there.
Yes, ma'am.
You felt menaced.
Yes, ma'am.
They were hitting you and they were yelling things at you.
Yes, ma'am.
And they had brandished a stick at you.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you ever get any kind of training in self-defense? Did you ever get any training in the law? Has anybody ever taught you what to do after you use self-defense? Have you ever given it any thought? Since then, yeah, but have you back then?
I had since then,
Did you think then that it was illegal to shoot someone who was attacking you?
no.
Were you afraid that the police would show up? Or did you know the police would show up? At that, when you were being attacked?
Kind of both.
Were you were sure that you were ultimately going to have to talk to the police about this?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were, when they came to the hotel to arrest you, you were very cooperative, weren't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Truthful with them about what was in your background.
Yes, ma'am.
I'll pass the witness.
Any recross?
Here.
So, and I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing it Mayo. How do you pronounce it? Yes, it is Mayo. Okay. Thank you. I do have a few questions for you. All right. Okay. Did your aunt know that you had that gun?
No.
Okay. It was against her rules.
Yes, ma'am.
Where'd you get the gun? Could you rewind the video a little?
Which scene would you like to see?
When they're both standing outside the door.
Okay, let's see. It's almost there.
Keep going. Okay, stop. Nope. Thanks. That's all right. We can. That's all right. Okay. Just want to play out. Alright, if you could pause it. So when the clerk is at the door and he's pointing and telling you to leave, why didn't you just go? Because you could have waited for her outside, right?
I didn't exactly feel so time my day. I thought we being outside would give me more of a reason to go back inside. And then I was totally.
And you said you left your parents' house when you were 13. Why did you run away at that time?
I was just misunderstood.
Well, how were you misunderstood? What was going on?
Childish, man. Like, my brothers would get into a fight, and I would feel my mom or my dad to the side.
I'm sorry, did you say you had been to the store before?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what did you want a cigar for?
That's right.
Weed. All right, have my questions prompted any questions from either side? All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You are free to leave and sit with your attorney. All right, Ms. Busby, please call your next witness.
Your Honor, we would ask that we have a 72 summer hearing, Dr. Bedard. I do have a, we can get into, we can run it through this testimony, just more advantageous to the court, but I do have a significant amount of case law as well as instances in which Dr. Bedard is found not qualified to testify about what I anticipate I'm going to testify here to expect.
All right, well, if you want to have the hearing, we can do that. let's do that first. All right, sir, if you would please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. All right, so we will have the hearing on whether this witness is an expert in the field. He is going to testify about.
Can you state your full name for the record?
Yes, Roy is honored.
And sir, what is your current occupation and position?
I'm a law enforcement and corrections trainer.
And what is your education background?
I have a bachelor's degree in criminology and criminal justice from Florida State University. I have a master's degree in educational psychology, and I have a PhD in that same discipline.
And what about your professional experiences? Can you tell us a little bit about your field experience?
Sure, I started in law enforcement in 1986. I went to the academy and was hired as a law enforcement officer in 1987 at the Florida State University Police Department. I quickly became a field training officer and spent most of my time there as a field training officer. A field training officer is somebody who trains police officers fresh out of the academy for policy considerations and essentially how to work in a particular geographical area of the city. I later transitioned to the Tallahassee Police Department, where I became a field service trainer as well as a field training officer and a field patrol officer, and continued in that capacity altogether for about 10 years. During that time, I founded my own company. I was teaching at the police academy as well. Law enforcement officers that were not only basic recruit students from into the academy for the first time, but also incumbents that were coming to the academy for specialized and advanced training. And my primary area was use of force and defensive tactics. I just teach general topics and other more specific topics, but those are the two primary areas I think that cut the teeth on. Prior to that, I was a martial artist, and so I had a strong background running a martial arts studio, dealing with what we call defensive tactics, which are the skills of fight, how to throw a punch, how to throw a kick, how to do ground defenses, strategies and tactics when being attacked, things like that. So a lot of that translated into my field work, and so I was sourced quite prominently by the larger community as an academy instructor and certainly by my agency as an internal use of force and teaching instructor.
Now, you were with Tallahassee Police Department, a field training officer for about 6 years, and for about 6 years you were reserve officer in Tallahassee. Is that correct?
Yes.
In conjunction with that, subsequent to that, you went to, you were a reserve officer for the Tallahassee County Police Department, and then currently you are the administrative reserve deputy for Washington County Florida Sheriff's Office.
That is correct.
But you have, let's talk about your training and certifications. Do you have police and training certification?
I do.
Could you tell us about that?
In the state of Florida, most states have what's called POST. This is a Police Officer Standards and Training Commission. We have something called the Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission, or CJSTC. They're responsible for licensing all law enforcement officers in the state of Florida. Last year, we had approximately 47,000. They also create curriculum for incumbents, usually advanced and specialized courses that I spoke about. These courses, not only by in my earlier years went through, but later wrote the curriculum forms. We call the instructor school, training and trainer schools.
So you were a book author.
Both the book, and to this day, the state of Florida continues to use a lot of curriculum for training those 47,000 officers, as well as the police trainers that are found in every police department in the state.
Okay. So your business is called RRB Systems International.
But it's a DBA. The original business was Rapid Rotation Baton Incorporated. And the reason that it was called that was because I left full-time law enforcement because I became a global trainer. I was around the world teaching law enforcement officers in 4 different continents tactics. And one of the tactics was an invention that I had patented called the Rapid Rotation Baton, and that is where it came from overseas. Later, as I branched out into more generalized instruction in the area of use of force and defensive tactics, I started using the DBA. It was less confusing to call it RRD, Systems International, rather than Rapid Rotation Regard Forward. But today it's an all-encompassing business. I continue to make product, I make safety gear for law enforcement, I make handcuffs and batons and holsters and duty belts and things like that, as well as provide consulting services.
Now, do you have any experience with teaching use of force and defensive tactics?
A lot of it. That's what I did from the day that I began law enforcement, more as an employee of an agency and later as a privateer. About making contracts with law enforcement, corrections, and military organizations around the world.
Now, what kind of people or organizations do you train in?
I think I've made ways that I train folks that are involved in public safety, so folks that are hired, commissioned to represent law enforcement and also military personnel. I have a lot of experience training civilians. I do a lot of civilian self-defense courses, and later as I aged in this profession, I was sourced by different groups. I trained prosecutors' offices, I trained public defenders' offices, I trained teachers, the School Board Association, being able to recognize, for example, an escalation of the potential fighting hallways. I don't just work with all kinds of different groups of civilian personnel.
Now, are you a subject matter expert for any entities at this point?
I am for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is the one who was commissioned by the governor to be responsible for the CJSTC that I spoke about. So I am considered a subject matter expert in the area of use of force and defensive tactics under the commission, and this is why they continue to source and provide experience in these areas.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the FELECJSTC, and that you offer the use of force tactics curriculum. Was it 41 Florida police academies?
And I think that number is still the same. The population changes with the number of academies or applications to have a license for this role.
How many police officers and correctional officers currently prescribe this curriculum?
Together, I would say 75,000.
Have you ever taught at any law enforcement academies?
A lot of the contracts that I have are from law enforcement academies. I was also, after writing the state's curriculum, I was sent by the state to academies all over the state of Florida to present it to trainers so that we could ramp them up on the new changes.
Okay. Do you have like a home base for this business?
I do. My background is in Tallahassee, as I mentioned. I'm not living there anymore. I'm living close to Orlando, in a town called Sanford, but I still have an apartment in Tallahassee because I commute and continue to teach at Thomas Law Enforcement Academy for all practical purposes. Our state academy. I say that because though there are 41 academies approximately in the state of Florida, the state agencies are all nestled in the capital, so they are all at Thomas Law Enforcement Academy. So that's
Okay. Now, that's training on self-defense. Let me ask you about your training in psychology. Would you tell me more about that?
Sure. I began my career, as I said, in law enforcement, and I was a trainer. And going through the process of policy and legal mandates for the use of force, my original entry into training law enforcement officers was strictly policy and law based. But I noticed pretty quickly that what was happening in the field was exactly what we were trained to do. So the question was why. And taking a personal study of this, I had to start to calculate into curriculum things like stress. How does stress affect you? What we were seeing was unusual things. For example, as a firearms instructor, we don't teach law enforcement officers to shoot all the bullets in their gun, to empty their magazines. But in the field, when the arousal level gets real high, that's what we see. A police officer will shoot 16 bullets at somebody. Why does that happen? it's happening because there are psychological constructs that need to be addressed as part of a training curriculum. So I went back to school in my 40s to try to get a better handle on this because I was a curriculum company. Business was all about training. And to kind of understand what was missing from sort of a larger picture of law enforcement, corrections, military, and civilian training. And I didn't know where to start, to be quite honest with you. I have a degree in criminology and criminal justice. What I had learned is why people commit crime. So, I was more interested in how to deal with the criminal. So I thought at first that I would end up in military studies or something like that. Turns out the data is in educational psychology. And I think when people think about educational psychologists, they think probably sports psychologists. That is where most of performance psychology is studied in the area of controlled sports. The study is different from clinical psychology. For example, I don't do diagnostics. I am not somebody that provides counseling to individuals that have disorders. I went through those classes, but that's not the direction I took. I was more interested in human behavior with people who were well, not unwell, like Navy SEALs or SWAT team members, things like that.
Have you counseled Navy SEALs or SWAT team members?
I train them all the time, yes.
Okay, just wanted to know.
Sure.
Now, in connection with this occupation, have you ever presented or taught your materials, your original materials, at professional conferences?
All the time.
In fact, you travel all over the world, don't you?
Still do that, yes.
How much time do you spend in Florida and home?
My wife would prefer more of it, but I am gone. I think I'll say my worst year, my best year, depending on how we look at it, was about 300 days outside of the country. Many years ago, I was teaching new supports and defensive tactics. I didn't spend that much time away, but I still probably have that kind of
Now, as for publishing, what books and articles have you published?
So obviously, I published a curriculum for the state of Florida, and that has gone through several iterations. I have published my dissertation, which was on decision making under stress for law enforcement officers. I have about 12 to 15 training manuals that I have published that I continue to supply to individuals worldwide. And most recently, I was asked to write 3 chapters for a college textbook on performance psychology for law enforcement.
Are you familiar, and could you describe to the board what these terms and concepts, what the definition of these terms and concepts are in relation to self-defense?
Sure.
Reactionary gap?
So reactionary gap is a construct that's based on reactionary time. And reactionary time is critical when you're designing a curriculum. And the reason for it is because as human beings, we are visual creatures. About 70% of the information that we gather from the environment is through our eyes. And it takes time for visual information to process. As you gather data from the environment, the first thing that happens is you segregate what's important. So there are things in the environment that are certainly germane to the context of the situation that you're presently in. And you pay attention to certain things. You use what we call, sensory aiding to get at things that are not. Once you do that, that information flows through the eyes because it becomes important. And that process goes into the eyes, it goes through the optical system, so not too complicated, to the back of the brain, simply under the brain, where light information essentially is assembled. And at first, what you see in that momentary millisecond is just lines, for whatever you do. Then it steps up to, let me just finish this part, because I think we're going to come back to this. That's B1. B2, what you start to see is color. And P3 is where you start to see depth. So what's happening is the picture's forming in your brain. It's not instantaneous. So this creates a reaction time. So when you're seeing something, you have to react. Then when you get into reaction time, you actually have a conscious awareness of something. That's what we call recognition. Then you have to analyze what you're seeing. What does that mean? Then you have to do what's called choice selection. What am I going to do about it? Then you have to initiate a motor skill. So those four things happen: recognition, analysis, selection, and then initiation of motor skill. Together, that takes about 250 milliseconds. So whenever you're making a decision, you have about 350 milliseconds gap between the time something happens and the time you're able to do anything about it. The best example, I think, is when you're traveling on the street, somebody hits the brake lights. If you're driving too close to them, it doesn't matter if you're focused on those lights, it's still going to take about 350 milliseconds to be able to make the decision, hit the brake, and stop. And what we find out is if you travel too close, we call it tailspin, is that you're going to crash, you're going to hit the back of the vehicle. So this is why we create a reactionary gap. We have to put space between ourselves and a threat. That would be the target on us. And in combat, of course, it would be the person that we're facing. To prevent ourselves from not being able to interfere with the attack. If you're closer than the reactionary gap allows for what's called a danger zone. When somebody were, for example, throw a punch at you, and you're within arm's distance, the first recognition of being punched is being punched. You would never see it happening. So you wouldn't have the ability to do anything against it. So what you do to compensate, you take a step back. Every fighter does this. You have to create that reactionary gap.
What about the theory of escalation and de-escalation?
So in law enforcement, we have a policy mandate that you have to stay proportional. But I think this is a general rule in law as well. Legislators have generally described the use of self-defense as being objectively reasonable. But how do you much more guidance than that? Law enforcement can sort of parse that apart and say, to be objectively reasonable, you have to stay proportional to a threat. So threats are typically dynamic. They're not passive, they don't sit there very long, they change from being more or less dangerous. And the skill of staying proportional is escalating as they become more dangerous, de-escalating as they become less dangerous, so that your force level is appropriate. And we've created an entire force matrix or force continuum, as often called it, to be able to describe what the appropriate behavior is when you appraise something as being dangerous, whether that danger is from an empty fist or whether it's from a knife or a gun. You would accommodate that by remaining proportional. So that sort of creates the foundation of, I think, any self-defense instruction, whether it's for law enforcement or for civilian personnel, that force is intended to be proportional, and to do that, you have to understand the concept of escalation or de-escalation.
And that is, I think that leads us right into that proportionality definition.
Yes.
It's more of the same thing, imagine.
It is, and if you chart this out, of course, like I said, the legislature hasn't done this for its law enforcement. So, for example, what's proportional to somebody's presence, their mere presence? Yeah, it would be your presence. That's about all you can do. What if they say something to you? That's verbal resistance. Well, you can react with a verbal response. What if they refuse to do what the police officer tells them to do? That would be a passive resistance. What can you do? You can use empty hand techniques. These are the grips, the grabs, the body holds, things like that, to perhaps move them from one place to another. What happens if they put their fists up and say, I'm going to fight? That's going to be active resistance, or they start to run away. You would have to escalate. And what we typically allow law enforcement officers to do is use the items on their belt. These would be things like the baton, it could be the taser, it could be pepper spray. There's a variety of things. What happens if they start fighting, really fighting? Now we are at an aggravated resistance level. Law enforcement officers can start hitting with theft, knocking out, knocking down. So the techniques will become more stringent. And what happens if that escalates from their perception is that they're going to kill you, cause you great bodily harm or death, and it's imminent, will then you escalate to a deadly force response. So as you can see, the chart as I spelled it out to you is proportional along the way. But you also have to recognize it the other direction. What if somebody's holding a gun, it's a deadly threat, you can draw your gun. What if they put it down? They de-escalate it, you're not allowed to shoot them. You have to de-escalate it. So this is the idea.
What about excessive combat stress?
So this is the more interesting thing to me is when I lay out rules like this and you sit here and you say, I can't see where you're coming from. You're contemplating, you're deliberating what I say. What we know under stress is that you don't have the ability to do that because it turns out that your brain has evolved in such a way that when you're under what we call high arousal, and I'll use the term stress and I'll describe it. Stress takes on a lot of different meanings. It's used in different areas. For example, in engineering, you can talk about the stress load of a bridge. You can talk about tensile stress, things like that. In psychology, what you're usually talking about is anxiety. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is a type of stress that is described as sort of a healthy, respectful unknown. You get anxiety when you don't know how something ends. And we all experience anxiety. For example, how am I going to pay for this? It's going to cause anxiety because somebody who is well be pronounced wouldn't get giving the same presentation of the bill. It can become very extreme. So when you're talking about stress or anxiety, the arousal level increases and it starts to affect human performance. I think I'll stop there and move on to the next question. But anxiety actually does help human performance to a point, and then it has a catastrophic break-off. And this is how our brains have evolved to turn off that thinking part of the brain.
In regards to this case, has your knowledge, training, and experience ever been used by prosecutors?
Yeah.
And what about, have you previously been qualified in state court
Yes.
and in federal court?
I know.
And roughly how many times have you qualified as an expert in state and federal court?
Around 60.
Okay. How many use of force incidents do you think you've reviewed in the course of your 39-year career?
Thousands.
How many times have you been hired to provide expert consultation advice on the use of force?
As a expert now, that's what they call it in this capacity, about 600 cases
And are these like law enforcement and civilian matters involving self-defense?
So in 2007, the state of Florida was the first state to pass a law called stand your ground. And the stand your ground laws are now sort of manifested in about 37 other states. So it's parts of it, not exactly the same. That was the first time that I really started testifying on behalf of civilians. I probably had 10 years of experience testifying mostly on behalf and sometimes against law enforcement, depending on the circumstances. But when civilians no longer had to desist or retreat from an attack and stand their ground, it kind of put them on par with law enforcement. Now we had to talk about things like proportionality, what kind of force we use before you just had to run away. At least do your back against the wall. So since 2000, I would say probably 2008, when the law took effect, I've been spending more of my time talking about civilian use of force in criminal cases than law enforcement use of force in civil cases.
Okay, what's the ratio, would you say, between your testifying for the state and the defense?
In a criminal case, I'm probably 80-20 for the defense, 20% for the prosecution. In civil cases, it's about 70% for the plaintiff and about 30% for the defense.
You've already told us that you have worked both in the defense and the prosecution. And you read the reports from both the state and the prosecution?
When I'm asked to, so obviously if it's a civil case, if it's a federal civil rights case, I have to, it's a requirement under the rule. In criminal cases, sometimes I'm asked to, oftentimes for litigation purposes, other times I'm not asked to, if I'm just going to hear, for example, stand your ground hearing before or other type of pre-trial hearing, or if I'm just going to be testifying in trial.
Okay. Have you testified in Dallas County as an expert before?
I have
How many times?
twice.
And when was that?
Last week, and not sure, probably a month and a half prior to that.
And did that court accept your area of expertise?
Good, yes.
And what other courts accepted your area of expertise?
So many circuits throughout the state of Florida. I think there's listed. I do a lot of testimony in the state of Florida. I do a lot of testimony in Georgia. I've testified in Alabama. I have a lot of cases in Florida for some reason. They continue to call me. So they Texas, I testified in Massachusetts, and South Carolina.
And what areas have other courts accepted as your areas of expertise?
So depending on the kind of case, remembering that I came late into the game in the 40s on the area of combat stress, it's not something I didn't know about. It was a very field, but in terms of fact matters, I don't think there seems to be the qualifying criteria for it. I wasn't often able to talk about things like brain function, for example, and stress and how it affects performance. So given that change, I guess, in the way that I've progressed professionally over the years, there were times when I was not permitted to talk about it. I was limited out, never disqualifying, but limited to only saying certain things. My reports tend to be pretty robust. Sometimes they're to help my client, the attorney, understand their case better. But I know there are things that I can't talk about. That's not the point of my report sometimes. And usually I just the judge allowed me to testify to what they think is relevant on the facts of any particular case. Most of the time it's use of force and defensive tactics. Most lately it is stress-related features, brain function, things that I think are more academic in nature than vocational.
So, are self-defense and use of force, are these recognized in legitimate areas of professional expertise?
Yes.
There are other people in the world that have this expertise.
Yes.
And they also are called upon at times to be expert witnesses in this field.
Yes, use of force experts actually are quite common. I would say, again, beginning with the standard ground law, it's oftentimes transferred to field in Florida when you're not using it. There's a lot of attorneys that call me to 30 to 50 cases to address the appeal for not using a use of force expert. So it's become more common, and I think at this point, because there are 37 or approximately other states using similar type of law, we're starting to see other states embrace the use of force expert, perhaps more than they used to embrace psychologists and domestic violence cases.
Okay, so, like, the use of force expert doesn't necessarily have to have a degree or a doctorate in psychology, right?
Depends on what they're talking about. I mean, if you want to talk about the vocational aspects of self-defense, things like what we call special knowledge. If you want to talk about proportionality, I don't think that requires an academic degree. If you want to talk about escalation, de-escalation, it doesn't require a college degree. I think a lot of use of force experts in the old days used to offer ultimate things of fact that don't do that anymore. Those are mostly in civil cases where I thought something was reasonable. I think it's for jury or judge to decide. But I have an interesting area that I talk about, which is the stress-related components of use of force and defensive tactics. And there are people like me, I'm not the only one who does it. I would say there's not a lot of people that have both the street experience as well as the academic background to talk about these things. So depending on who you hire and what questions you're asking, they are more or less going to be able to testify to the various components of a self-defense plan.
Now, in connection with that, are there established professional standards in this field?
There are, again, depending on what the testimony is, so the established professional standards when it comes to psychology come from a lot of peer-reviewed literature. Certainly, the diagnostic and statistical literature talks about some incidents not from a disorder perspective, but like perseveration, sort of this unnecessary repeat of behavior that you see, for example, OCD. If you get stressed enough, we see those behaviors like pacing, for example, this perseverative behavior. So those are authorities on those issues. When it comes to the vocational thing, certainly there are groups like the International Association of Chiefs of Police that really is an international law enforcement organization, the National Sheriff's Association here in the United States has profound, it's a think tank, if you will. The Americans for Law Enforcement, I can go down the line of these authoritative groups that are setting standards.
Okay, that is an answer. Is the subject matter of your proposed testimony within this recognized scope of the field? Are professionals in your field regularly called upon to provide opinions on matters such as this?
Yes.
What principles from your field do you rely on informing your opinion in this case?
So the field of law enforcement, obviously, as it comes to vocational and specialized knowledge, that's where my background is in understanding things like the fight, the gritty street. That probably comes from my school experience. When it comes to the more academic areas, which are relative to decision making, relative to prediction, and how we use theoretical frameworks to be able to predict what comes next. And then the behaviors that are start getting into the area of agency. What are we actually able to do and not do from a neurological perspective? Those type of things are, as I said, found in the literature.
Okay. And these are the principles that are widely accepted in your field.
Yes.
And did you apply these principles in a manner consistent with the standard of practice in your field?
I do.
In this case involves an altercation involving multiple people confronting the client and how he responded to that situation. What aspects of this case require expert understanding?
So multiple attackers is a unique problem, not only for humans, but for any animals who are addressed with threats that are coming from different areas. And the reason for that is because under stress vision narrows. You end up literally seeing a wide, useful field of vision to a very narrow, useful field of vision. We sort of evolved to do that. Some people describe it as tunnel vision. On the order of being really stressed, it's like looking through a paper towel. Of being really stressed, it's like looking through a soda straw. It's been described that way. When literally there's a blackness or darkness around this very, very acute focus on something. I've experienced that field interviewing, for example, somebody who's been around maybe 40 years. Can't tell me who was holding the gun, doesn't know what color they were, how tall they were, what their clothes were, but could almost read the serial number off the gun. That's what they were focused on. So when you're dealing with multiple attackers, obviously that becomes liability. You have an intense focus that is narrow, and you still have other threats, and you're fighting to try to be able to see these other threats. And law enforcement is trying to train this and try to keep your arousal level down so that doesn't happen. But to typical civilians, it is a liability. And oftentimes they often report, as I said to you, something very final, but don't see what everyone else is seeing around them because they're experiencing arousal in the fishbowl, not outside of it.
Can you tell me that has to do with an extreme adrenaline drive?
It does. Should I explain the process?
Or would you prefer to explain that as we get into it?
It's up to you. I'm happy to explain it.
Let's just get to this and we'll go back.
Okay.
What about self-defense and the use of force that a layperson without your background might not understand?
I think most use of force in self-defense it becomes curious to the person who uses it as a stressful environment. They don't know why they experience perceptual distortions, why things happen in slow motion. They don't know why something that appeared further away than it actually is, or something appeared closer than it actually is. They don't know why when they shoot the gun, they can't actually hear it because of what's called auditory exclusion, where the tympanic membrane has just sort of shut off because it's not necessary to survival. They don't know why they have fragmented memories during these incidents. They're not sure, they can't recall exactly what happened. Certainly when they hear about it later, this is the kind of thing that you think you never forget, and the person that's once again in the fishbowl simply can't remember certain features of it. So I think if you don't tell Lane that those things happen, remember, most people have never been in a situation like this statistically. If you look at the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, what you find out is that only 1 to 3% of the people in the entire country have ever experienced a violent crime. That means that in any particular population, if you sample a population, there's a much, much greater chance that you're going to run across people who have never had an experience like this than someone who has had an experience like this. So I think this is why it's so critical to be able to inform certain hires of fact that these things do happen. And they happen to not only the person that may be on trial, but they would happen to the people in the jury box as well, given the same set of circumstances on average.
So, there's a lot about defensive tactics that aren't common knowledge. Is that what you're telling me?
It's not, and I think we've come a long way. I think it was assumed for certainly my first time into this business, that everyone just, had been in a street fight with your brother in the backyard. Everyone knew how to fight, they just knew how to, but we're talking about a different level. We're talking about terminal threats. Most of the cases that I testify to is where in the next few minutes you could be dead. Most people have not had that experience. I think, as I said, there's a little bit more traction in this area of use of force expert because there is starting to become a realization as we sort of pull back the veil of violence. We're seeing not only the movie version of it, which I think most people tend to use as their framework for understanding the television version. We're actually seeing some YouTube, for example, we're seeing a lot more of that. People are starting to see really other things that are visceral and even have an effect when you're not in the fishbowl because they are such emotional ones.
Okay. So, what materials did you review for this case?
There was a lot. There was, I think, 250 pieces that was in discovery that was given to me. Generally, I looked at law enforcement reports. I looked at a lot of video. The snippets of video. I looked at the scene video, certainly I saw here in the court today. I saw a blown up version of that, which I think is a little bit more helpful to understand what happened. Specifically, where the hands were, where the hoodie was, and all that kind of stuff. I looked at autopsy information. I looked at laboratory information. I saw a bunch of photographs. Those are generally the kind of things that I see. I see pretty skills.
So, what specific methodology did you use to analyze all this information?
So my methodology has been the same every case that I've been asked to testify to. Usually things that are protocol. In this case, you would have. And so the money bonus values is something that you think is going to be the house. That's my first determination. So first, if it seems like it's touching on areas that I have expertise, then I am hired. And when I'm hired, I'm going to ask for all of the discovery and try to parse through it. Oftentimes, my clients, the attorneys that hire me, tell me exactly what I need, because again, this is not an area of common sense. So I usually get full discovery. I discard the things that I think are not relevant to my opinion, and I embrace the things that are relevant. At that point, if I'm asked to write a report, I start to draft a report. Sometimes I draft notes. If I think it's a situation where law enforcement's done a pretty good job of interviewing an individual, I will testify about that interview. But don't think there's a good job of those questions that have been unanswered oftentimes as part of my methodology asked to interview the client myself. And I did that in this particular case. And then I ultimately prepare myself for trial by cross-referencing the literature in some areas, whether it's specialized knowledge or if it's scientific, and prepare myself for interviews.
So, has that methodology been accepted in these other courts in which you testified?
Yes.
And how many times?
About 6.
So, let me ask you a term of art. What is a defensive or force continuum?
I describe that to you. It is a policy narrative that law enforcement embraces about how do we train people about objective reasonableness. The theory about objective reasonableness in law enforcement is that the fight is decided before it's even real. So we kind of know what we're going to do when the fight happens with the anticipation or expectation of law enforcement officers getting the fight. So we create a force continuum. But it's also a measure after the fight is over as to did you do everything appropriately. So this is an advantage, I think, that the profession has in being able to have sort of a structured continuum or chart of matrix, as we call it, things, to determine with a reasonable degree of certainty that force was appropriate, that force was reasonable in the framework. I don't generally talk too much about that in civilian cases because, as I said, the legislature hasn't created force continuum policy or for civilians to follow. So what I gather from the continuum is the issue of proportionality, escalation, de-escalation. I think that's relative in all conflict, whether it's a professional conflict with law enforcement or it is a public conflict with civilians.
So how does it
applying this particular test?
So, being able to recognize that something's excessive is something that any good self-defense instructor should be able to do. So it lays a foundation for understanding whether given a certain set of circumstances that there is a level of proportionality. For example, if, I mentioned to you previously, a deadly threat can proportionally be met with a deadly response. If it's less than a deadly threat, it can't. So I think as a foundational basis for a self-defense instructor, you have to really start there. And certainly when you're advising my clients, I might say, look, I don't think you want to testify in this case. If I have a disagreement, because I'm going to have to, and did, in this circumstance, I thought that perhaps force might be excessive.
And so, we're talking about the difference between shooting to stop an attack and shooting to kill. Is that?
It's huge. Again, with the nature of hindsight bias, and this is another way that we'll qualify as an expert in cognitive bias, sometimes in relationship to police investigations. Hindsight bias sometimes can lead us astray, like most cognitive biases do. It's a way of thinking that misses a degree of accuracy in terms of consideration. When you have a situation where a person is killed because of the use of force, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person was intended to be killed. So, for example, you have to look at it from the person that's firing the gun in their shoes, when they don't know when they fire the shot the person is going to live or they're going to die. Shooting stop means that when the threat ends, the shooting stops. However, if the threat continues, the shooting continues. Shooting to kill is very different. That means, for example, if I'm in a use of force encounter, it's a deadly force situation, I fire the first shot, down goes my opponent, I run over to him and I kill him with a bunch more bullets to make sure he doesn't get up. That's a very different kind of shooting. That is shooting to kill, not shooting to stop. Shooting to stop would mean to fire that shot, the threat stops, the shooting stops. So I think this is a distinction that has to be made.
And so, can we discuss what the concept of anxiety and arousal is?
Sure. Now we're getting into some of the science of self-defense, and this is the part of the broken back to university. Turns out that when you are anxious, and I describe anxiety, that your performance actually increases. And you can see this in a sport. There's a lot of different things. That the more anxious you become, generally the more aroused you become. That's the term. Now, it's sort of mapped out on what's called a Yerkes-Dodson curve. It's an inverted view, if you can picture it upside down horseshoe. What happens is as you start to climb up that anxiety slope, you are dealing with what's called a challenge. And this is going to operationalize these terms. Challenges are not threats. They're different, but they're on the same continuum. So we like challenges, it turns out, in sports, right? We watch sports because we want to have a good challenge to our team. We play sports because we want to have a good challenge. So what happens is, as the game starts to progress, we try to become more aroused, because what happens is we become optimized. And when I say optimized, what I mean is on this chart at the very top, the very apex of that curvature is an area called the I zone. And this is the individual zone of optimal functioning, telling us that we all have it. It's not the same for everyone. And who you are, your optimal zone could be different. But when you're there, you're as good as you can be. This is, for example, the basketball player. You see that basketball player that just simply can't miss a shot. Every shot that they make goes in. It's amazing. And the crowd is on them cheering. And they have what we're often referred to in sports psychology as the hot hand. Right? Well, what's happening is, at that optimal level, their coping mechanisms are very much intact. Their team is holding back the opposing players. They are capable of finding the ball's capable of finding them. Everything is just working. But if those coping mechanisms break down, if suddenly your team tires and is not able to effectively keep the other team off of you, here's what happens. You're no longer being challenged, you're being threatened. So this is where the term challenge and threat separate. And this is sort of a definition by Lazarus and Bowen. They talk about appraisal. So whenever you have two people standing side by side, it's what they appraise the threat to be that makes the threat, and it's really compared to their self-efficacy. What is my ability to deal with versus the guy next to them? What's his ability? So I might see something as a challenge, you might see something as a threat. Not uncommon, so that's why it's individualized. So just a final thing, when a stress level gets very, very high, for example, in the world that I live in, I don't live in the basketball world, I do a lot of studies. I live in the world of street fights and police involved shootings. When it gets very high, we don't see a gradual descent like the inverted U might suggest. We see a dramatic descent, something called a catastrophe model, where your performance breaks off. And that means that your skill level is going to fall apart. And that means that your cognition is going to fall apart as well. Your ability to think is going to be greatly affected. So this is the relationship between anxiety and performance based on the morality scale.
You described that there are different types of violence. Can you define the types as they relate to use of force?
Sure. I think in use of force, you have to sort of, and this goes back to our most basic understanding of our children. The question is who started it, right? You're fighting with your siblings, who started it? Who is the one that's using the aggressive force? Who is the one that's using the defensive force? And in science and literature, a lot of this comes from mythology, studying about animals generally, because they're animals, they're minds. So we have to acknowledge that there's a ton of data that can be found because sometimes it's easier for us to look at in the world of human beings. But we talk about aggressive force, and it's often referred to as affective violence. When an aggressor starts the fight, they're using acquisitive violence. Acquisitive means they're trying to acquire something. In the human world, for example, somebody points a gun at you and says, "Give me the wallet," they're trying to acquire your wallet. But it doesn't have to be your wallet. It could be your pride, right? It could be a bully on the playground. It is trying to acquire some reputation for himself at your expense. That's acquisitive violence. Now, acquisitive violence, the interesting thing about it is that the offender knows how it ends. And this is why it's different than the other kind of violence. Because the one that's starting the fight or is in command of the fight knows how it ends. The person that points a gun and says, "Give me your wallet," even if you give them your wallet, there's no guarantee they're not going to shoot you. But the person holding the gun knows it. So what we don't see are stress artifacts. You don't see this deliberate breakdown of performance with a person who's using acquisitive violence. To the juxtaposition of that is the person who is on the receiving end of acquisitive violence. We call that affective violence. And affective violence is called that because most affective violence is controlled by the optic cortex, the part that says, "I will shoot you, I won't shoot you." But the limbic system, this is the emotional part of the brain. This is the part that's being affected by survival constructs. These natural stressful reactions to internal encounters. Their level of violence, and they fight back, is known as affective violence, and it has a different kind of signature. These are the people that report perceptual distortions, cognitive breaks, flashbulb memories, all that kind of stuff. The acquisitive violent person doesn't generally report that at all. This is your think of the classic serial killer, is in command of a big victim of the serial killer, will report all of these unusual occurrences when they are under attack. So these two levels of violence are important to understand.
So what is a threat display?
Threat displays are, again, something that we see in mythology. There's really different kinds of threat displays. All animals exhibit them. I think if you talk about dynamic threat displays are really kind of like bluffs. They're benign. It's the pufferfish that gets really big in the water. But he doesn't suddenly take on armor and have the ability to take on a predator. He just looks bigger. And the theory of a threat display is to discourage attack. And this is one of the more interesting things, I think, and one of the things I see in this case. Oftentimes, these get construed as offensive behaviors, but they're actually opposite. They're defensive behaviors. The theory of a threat display is to send a signal to the aggressor that the cost of continuing this about to be exchanged is too high. I'm too big. You don't want to mess with me. Typically, we see, just to generalize, in the animal kingdom, you can get bigger, you get louder, you turn colors. And if you think about things like lizards or alligators or lions that suddenly roar real loud, they're not trying to fight. They're trying to keep the aggressor from fighting. So this is a method of de-escalation. Now, there's another kind of threat display that's not dynamic. It's known as an aposematic threat display. What's an aposematic threat display? This is an audible. This is the rattlesnake. The rattlesnake wags its tail not because he's trying to ambush you. He wants you to know he's there. He wants you to keep distance. He wants you to de-escalate. But if you interfere with that zone of comfort, the rattlesnake actually has onboard weaponry that will be very costly in the form of things and venom, of course. So there are animals like lions that may expose their claws or howler monkeys that pull back their lips and expose their fangs in an attempt to stop the fight from happening. So postural cues are very important in threat displays, whether they're dynamic, which oftentimes do work, or they're aposematic, which, if they don't work, then they can follow up with the appropriate level of response.
So, can you explain what the decision-making model would be?
Yes. And this goes to the architecture of a rank. How do humans think? This sort of explains in the beginning that when you are taking on any task, you have to make decisions about what you're going to do. And it could be, we do this every day. This isn't something reserved for a special moment in a courtroom. Whenever we take on a task, we gather data from the environment that's relevant to the task, and we sort of disregard the rest. I often point out, for example, as I talk here today, probably nobody in this room has noticed the small whir of the air conditioner over my head. Now you'll all hear it, you won't get them out, because your ears are now focused on something I called your attention to. But prior to that, you faded it out. It wasn't important to my conversation. So when you gather this data, you do what's called segregation. The segregation part is the part of segregating stuff that doesn't matter and embracing things that do matter. This creates a moment of what's known as anticipation and prediction. This is where most of the self-defense cases rest. What is it that you think is about to happen? This is how we have to do self-defense. In the next few moments when you don't know, everyone knows how it ends, or everyone knows what happened. We can't look at it from that perspective. That's a hindsight bias. We have to look at it from the perspective of what do you do when you don't know how this is about to end? So the prediction model starts to take us into choice selection. What is my best choice? Now, there are two things that govern the decision, which is the action of what you're going to do. One of them is consequence, and the other one is going to be time pressure. If the consequences are high, the decision will be fast. If the time pressure is high, the decision will be fast. If the consequences are low, the decision can wait a while. You can decide, is this the best choice? If the time pressure is low, you can decide a while. And this creates this idea that people may ask me about later of the signal detection theory and how that works. It's the idea that you are leaning in one direction of what are called two forced alternative choices. Should I do this or should I do that? Does he have a gun? Does he not have a gun? Is that car going to run me over? Is it not going to run me over? Is the pistol loaded? Is it not loaded? Is he going to punch me? Is he not going to punch me? Our brains are highly efficient, so they're trying to reduce the amount of external stimuli to really two things to help us make decisions. These are called heuristics, and we'll talk about this soon.
How do humans make decisions based upon predictions?
Well, Ms. Busby, is this related to his expertise in the field, or can we just cut to that as opposed to the definitions of them?
I had a map here, but I'm happy to do that, Your Honor. Based on Dr. Bedard's education, training, experience, and demonstrated expertise in self-defense and use of force, I respectfully tender Dr. Bedard as an expert in these areas.
Well, Ms. Busby, the state does get a chance to cross-examine the witness.
I was just going to offer to let them do that.
Well, I would be interested to know what exactly the defense is going to offer.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. That's it. Okay, what are your opinions in this case?
My first most important thing is this is a stressful situation, and I think that puts it in my wheelhouse of being able to talk about how humans deal with stressful situations. I did interview the defendant this case. I did talk to him. I did notice that there were some comments that he made.
Yeah, I'm gonna object to, I know that he can provide the information, but it's not necessarily admissible, but so much as he was going to go into a statement specifically from the defendant, I believe that in particular is improper. It's hearsay evidence.
Well, it can be either a prior consistent or inconsistent statement, and if it is the basis of his professional opinion, I'm going to allow it for the purpose of this hearing at this point. You may continue.
So all I would say with the detailed information is that I did notice that there were some kinds of perceptual distortions. I noticed there were some kinds of cognitive breaks. Obviously, his memory was affected. Even to this day, it's still unable to recall certain things. So that would be one thing. This is a stressful situation that was going to have an effect similar to what I described through all these details. Another opinion I had is that multiple attackers are very dangerous. They represent, by themselves, without even the use of weapon, more than likely a aggravated threat because of the nature of television, the nature of being able to have vision narrow. I do have an opinion that go with Sir Walter Cannon talks a little bit about fight or flight. I think it's a term that most people have heard. In psychology, we often talk about this is approach or avoidance behavior. So approach behavior would be fight, avoidance behavior would be flight. And the assumption is whenever you're threatened, you appraise the situation, determine whether or not you have the appropriate coping mechanisms if you decided to go run, which is the more natural way, or you're going to have to stay and fight, or you want to fight. This was a case where it wasn't only the defendant that was defending himself, but he also had his president. So his choices were quite limited in his ability to just evacuate the scene. He mentioned to me over and over, and I think he said it even here today in the courtroom, so I think that he was very worried about his president, which meant that he was in the fight zone. I noticed on the video these threat displays. I think we can talk about that. It's very clear that he is taking what's known as a pugilistic posture. It looks to me as if his pugilistic posture is intended for the purpose of keeping somebody away from you. When you brace, when you lower your shoulders, when you bring your hands up, you're saying, using a dynamic threat. Now remember, he's really got one have a somatic brace, got a gun in his pocket. If he wanted to fight, that would have been the right thing to do. Well, they're going to just start shooting, clear everybody out of there. But presents this threat display. It appears to me it hopes that the attack will continue, but it does. And so he has to address that, and eventually he does do at the time of the shooting what perhaps might be his only choice. He's got a quick bullet over his head. He's got very limited television. He is feeling the barrage of attacks from all sides. All he can probably see is the legs and feet of multiple people around him. And we have another area that I think I should talk about. That's called chunking behavior. There was this idea that, you should be able to look at everybody. That's not the way the brain works under stress. We know this from the sport world. The quarterback who is suddenly being rushed by 11 people does not look at 11 attackers. They chunk the information. There's 4 over here, there's 3 over here, there's 4 over there. And the quarterback maneuvers around these groups. They don't move around individuals. That's what your eye is capable of seeing. And that's what's called cognitive load. You have cognitive load. There's only so much cognition the brain can hold on to. This is why we have 7 digits in our phone numbers. We remember. So we parse it 7 plus or minus 2. So when you're dealing with high stress situations with multiple attackers, you tend to chunk. So I noted even today when you asked the question, were you aiming at it? So I was aiming at the group. That's very typical of high stress. That's high arousal stuff. You got a group of people, doesn't know what each one individually is doing, sees this sort of visual mass and fires in the direction of the attack. So this is an area that seems to be consistent with somebody who is lashing out as a affective use of force against a multiple attack.
Do you have an opinion as to what happens when they play over the space?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the natural tendency of your vision to narrow and become tunnel vision, you now have a very tangible obstruction, the clothing itself, which can induce panic. I think he used that word to induce panic. It will induce panic because even though you're unclear cognitively as to what's happening with perceptual distortion, what you are aware of is you can't see, you won't be able to see from your left because you actually have this fabric pulled over your head. So this is going to raise that arousal level. It's going to start to result in that, once again, that sort of decline because now you're threatened, not challenged. And the decision making that follows is oftentimes going to not be well deliberated, not thought out. It's going to be heuristic. Heuristics are snap decisions. These are the things that kept you alive the last time something like this happened. They're going to keep you alive now. We don't use choice selection like you would if you were picking stocks, where you could sit there with low consequences perhaps and low time pressure and go, I think I'll put my money over here. What happens in the literature is we see when you don't do choice selection, your brain very quickly goes through past memories and it selects the thing that pops on the screen first as the thing that will probably work. If you've never experienced this before, you try to find something similar that you acted in a certain way, and you apply that to this novel situation. So that's one of the things that I think also occurs with the fabric over your head is that your consequences are high, your time pressure is high, you're not doing choice selection, your response, drawn line, heuristic, snap.
Do you have an opinion about the second shooting?
I do, and this goes to, and I think I should say this just as a matter of prior fact, understanding the complexity of reaction time. What happens with reaction time, we see the second shooting, remembering that he sees a weapon in the store, and then sees something outside, assumes it's still a weapon. When he picks the shoe up, and we know it's a shoe, we have it in the video, we can watch it later. When he picks it up, he perceives this as a weapon. And what happens is during that time period, you have to say, okay, I recognize the weapon, I analyze the weapon, I decide what to do, and now I initiate motor action. How much time will pass? 350 milliseconds. You know, you can get about 2 to 3 shots out of the gun in 2 to 350 milliseconds. That's not a lot of time, but a semi-automatic like he was holding can be perseverated on very, very quickly. During that time period, there's another interesting thing that happens, and I talked about this before all the time. When the threat stops, it's not instantaneous that you recognize it. You have to notice that it stopped, analyze that it stopped, decide what I'm going to do, stop shooting, and then you have to cancel the motor script. So what happens is, as you are shooting, the motor script is this electrical signal that goes up to this part of your brain. It's called your premotor cortex. Premotor cortex distributes it to the motor cortex. Another single shot down your central nervous system, and it goes to, in this case, your index finger. And so your index finger starts to pull, and it's automatized. It's not thinking. This is probably why even most people who shoot have no memory of doing it, because it's not imprinted consciously. It is a almost reflexive maneuver. I need to do something. I think I will shoot, and then boom, before you know, the gun is off. So this is what I see on the second shooting is as he draws back, within milliseconds he's shot. So it looks to me that if he's making the decision, am I in threat or am I not in threat, that would be enough time to fire one bullet. I think it's harder to explain why somebody after a shooting would raise their hand up and continue to attack, but that's what we see. And he gets shot, doesn't surprise me.
So, do you have an opinion as to why a person who is involved in a self-defense event would not immediately go report that to the police?
I do, and this is also very, very common in many of the cases that I've looked at. It turns out it's still self-defense. So when we engage in all these processes, I didn't really talk about the central nervous system. But the central nervous system has, for all practical purposes, 2 parts. One of them is your sympathetic nervous system, which is the part that mobilizes you for survival. And the other is the parasympathetic nervous system that calms you back down. When you're mobilized for survival, things are heart rate is going to increase, blood pressure is going to increase, your attention is going to narrow, you're going to get an adrenaline dump. I think you called it norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol into your system. You're going to become stronger and faster and more endurant than you ever have been before. This is the adrenaline dump. All of that happens in an instant. Now, when those chemicals are in your system, they have a profound effect. They change things. They change the way you see things, the way you hear things, the way our brain functions. We move from a slow, deliberate, and contemplative cognitive state to a very fast, rapid, efficient, heuristic state. All that's happening. We're not controlling any of it. This is a consequence of our behavior. After the event is over, that doesn't go away. Your central nervous system is not interested in the law. It's not interested in policy. It's interested in keeping you alive. That's what it's interested in doing. And I think most people, at least as it's been described to me so many times, what do you do when you don't know what to do? That's the question. And you're under this higher level. And all these chemicals are going through your system. What you try to do is buy time. And so what we see is people who are, if I can use the term, involved in perfectly good self-defense cases, they run. They get in their car, they flee. They don't know what to do. And here's what they do know. There's the threat's not over. The police are going to show up. And the police are more than likely going to arrest them. What are they going to tell the police? I'm not sure. I need a lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money for a lawyer. All of those thoughts come into the mind of panic. And what you see is that people try to buy time. And they flee and they come back later on, perhaps after talking to someone, getting counsel, maybe with their mother or their best friend or things like that. So it's quite common that the reaction of fleeing after an event is still part of the self-defense process.
And one more question, and this is not something we talked about earlier, but do you have an opinion as to what you observed in the police interrogation of my client?
I don't know if you asked me to comment on that, but I certainly watched it, and I didn't think it was a very good interview. That's why I asked if I could in the client. There seemed to be a narrative that the detective was giving your client, not and if you look at it, it's probably recorded words. I think the detective was doing 95% of the talking. So basically telling the talking, here's what happened, and the responses are mostly yes, those kind of things. It's not a very good interview because the question is, what is the client thinking? Whenever homicide's not against the law, murder is against the law. There's also this justifiable homicide, this self-defense issue. Law enforcement should be trying to get to that. What kind of killing was this? Was it necessary? Was it reasonable? Didn't understand that. So I think so much of why we're here today has to do with that investigation. I needed to ask the questions myself because they're just simply not.
And when you did ask those questions yourself, were you satisfied that the defendant behaved, acted in self-defense on the evening of December 30th?
To me, it seemed reasonable. Again, I think it's up to your honor to decide whether or not it's reasonable. If you want to find a jury, we'll go to a jury. But having looked at thousands of cases, hundreds of divorce cases, this seems to be a use force given multiple attackers, given the presence of a weapon, given the presence of the cousin, and the high consequence and high time pressure. I think you could have a police officer like this for sure.
All right, cross-examination regarding the 702 issue.
All right, Dr. Bedard, I appreciate it. My name is Patrick Capti. I'm going to ask some questions. Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about your law enforcement experience very briefly. Okay. So I understand that you are a pretty accomplished karate instructor, and then also when you were younger, you also performed karate for our country.
I did things like on US too.
So you're pretty well acquainted with use of force, pretty well acquainted with how you should defend yourself if you were particularly presented with a threat.
From a training perspective, yes. I mean, assuming my acquaintance with it is telling me what to do or not do if this happens. My acquaintance with what did that look like after it happens is probably not in the martial arts background so much. But I think what I've learned really at the university.
So you said you started as a police officer in 1987.
Yes.
And you were an active police officer until 1995, is it?
96.
96. Okay. So for those 9 years or so, you worked for Tallahassee Police Department and also using Florida State.
First University. Yes.
So you worked in those two different contexts.
Yes.
What was your role as a police officer when you were hired by Tallahassee and also when you worked in Florida State?
Pretty much the same. I was hired as a patrol officer, so I answered all types of calls from loud noise complaints to homicides and everything. I was, as I said to you in service training, I was sourcing immediately into our training unit for the purpose of teaching other officers.
Was that in Tallahassee or was that before?
So both of these are really sort of mirror images of my I moved from one capacity to another, but only in the name of two of the same things. I was also a field training officer at Florida State University. I was also a field training officer at the police department. I was also in service training.
Let's stop right there. You answered my question. So for the vast majority of your active police duty, let's say, for the time that you spent for these two police departments, you worked in patrol.
Yes.
Were you ever a detective or investigator investigating crimes? In any crimes?
So it's hard to answer that question. If you were to stop me and detect my saying,
Were you ever given a badge and told that you were a
I was definitely an investigator, as all police officers are. I was not a detective.
So you might get the introductory information on the scene from whatever witnesses and then pass that along to the person that's responsible for filing the case, sending it over to the DA's office or whatever law enforcement agency might be appropriate. But you're not going to be the person that's signing off on those warrants saying that there's probable cause in most instances.
Yeah, yeah. So more of that happened, of course, in the University of Pittsburgh. We were a much smaller agency. We didn't have the resources of a huge investigative division. We handled a lot of our cases from start to finish. I have done the work, so I have access to this and the training to do it.
How many homicides have you investigated?
Oh, yeah. Dozens.
For a police department. As the
Yeah,
lead,
that's all I'm talking about.
as the lead detective.
I don't know, perhaps one or two, and then we'll see
What are those cases? What are the names of those defendants? So you investigated 2 homicides in your career. You were the lead investigator.
Yes.
Okay. You signed off on those warrants, and you don't remember who those 2 individuals
So they weren't warrants. I think in both cases there was a warrant, and the individual was still there, and none of the rest.
So you viewed the murder.
It was an armed suspect that was searching for him. I felt probably cause on the scene. I did a probable cause affidavit, but not the purpose of a warrant.
Okay, so you have 2 cases that you were the lead investigator for homicides. Correct?
Again, I wasn't a detective, so, but yes, I handled trouble.
Yeah, I understand that wasn't your role. Your role was more defensive tactics, teaching, field training officer, and patrol while you were working actively.
Well, it wasn't.
As a police officer.
I was a patrol officer. I did deal with calls for service involving homicides. I probably dealt with dozens of homicides that I responded to, started to investigate, and handed them on. There's probably 2 occasions early on when I actually did a start finish just because of resources.
Okay. So, how many critical incidents have you yourself been the lead investigator for when it comes to either a death in custody, so say that experience with the sheriff, or an officer involved shooting?
The investigative things mentioned 2. There's 2 arrests. The lead investigator started to finish. I've been involved in hundreds of critical incidents that first on the scene, first to respond, and then took the report, met with investigators, handed it off to them, and allowed them to do their actual work.
Okay. Now, you understand that you're not trying to tell this court in any way that the defendant in this case, Carmelo, was a police officer, correct?
Yep.
Okay. You understand that he is just a normal, ordinary person, no training that you know of when it comes to self-defense, and you're actually sitting there when he said there's no normal training, right?
Yes, I think it was
Okay. So, in so much as your testimony goes to law enforcement's force continuum, the response that you would expect in the training or policies that a law enforcement officer might have when dealing with a threat, that you would agree with me does not apply to this particular individual.
It
This
is,
remain.
I don't think that's true. I think it is foundation.
You would agree with me that he has no specific training in those areas.
He's not here for observation.
Are you familiar with the law in the state of Texas?
Roughly. I mean, I read it. I know it.
We'll come back, but let's jump right into that. Isn't it true that just last week you testified that you were not familiar with the law here in the state of Texas? Has something changed in between then?
Yeah, perhaps the definition of familiarity. And it certainly know it exists. I think I can describe it. But my first response, and I don't remember what it was exactly, was I'm not a lawyer. I'm not familiar, as you are, sir, with the nuances of all of the combat plans in Texas. I think the work to do. I'm not here to offer legal opinions, but I am aware that the use of deadly force requires a standard of objective reasonableness, and if the person reasonably believes that is doing it, they're going to be a problem.
And you would agree with me that that standard of objective reasonableness, I think you alluded to it a couple times before, that's ultimately something for the fact finder, the judge, or the jury to decide.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned earlier that you're hesitant to even enter into that vein because that might potentially invade the province of the jury.
I am. Yes.
And isn't it true that other courts have actually given you guidance and told you, either by their court orders or by stating that you cannot get into specific testimony, that that area is way outside the bounds of what your expertise is?
Yes.
Now, when we're talking about your law enforcement background as well, actually, you know, let's get your educational background. You said you had a master's degree in sports psychology, correct?
Education psychology, with an emphasis on sport, exercise, and performance.
A master's degree in educational psychology, and you know, I'm not an expert in that field. How would you define what exactly educational psychology is?
I think I kind of did, but I'll repeat myself.
I didn't go ahead.
Educational psychology deals with people, not disorder, with well-being. And as I said, I think most of the data is in the world of sports because, frankly, it's easy to study. It's a little bit harder to study, for example, the deadly force, because we don't know when it's going to happen. So we don't have people that have to go outside in the battlefield studying what happens when the war is made. We don't have people from the police department saying what happens when it's big miserable people. We have them at the football field during the Super Bowl when there's 2 seconds left in the game and one team is down by 2 points, and the field goal kicker is being watched by millions. It's a lot of anxiety, it's a lot of stress. We have laboratories there studying those kind of things. We're able to replicate those kind of things. So most of the data that I know about this comes from that world, from the world of sports psychology. In terms of performance psychology, that's the area I know.
I'm sorry, before we move on to a different type of psychology, I'm a little unclear. What specifically is the definition of sports psychology? How would you define the master's degree that you received?
It is a degree that is designed to offer advice and counsel to individuals who are engaged in high performance endeavors.
Would you say it essentially, and I got this from Florida State's website, where you got your degree, but essentially that students who gain a master's in sports psychology will gain an understanding of the science and psychology of athlete performance and welfare. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
That's generally what a master's in sports psychology does, correct?
In sports psychology.
Sports psychology is a specialized field that applies psychological knowledge and skills to improve athletes' well-being and performance in sports and exercises.
I think it's
Okay. Your doctorate in educational psychology, how would you define that?
it was a continuous program. I started my master's degree right through my PhD. So the coursework was the same. I think so I continued on to my next course and finished my course.
I may have missed it in there somewhere, but did you ever get a degree in human physiology? Have you ever worked in a role where human physiology was either in a research context or a university, or in your job as a law enforcement officer? Have you ever had any specific individualized training when it comes to human physiology that makes you an expert in that field?
You have to set the standard for expert in the court as a fairly good law for an expert. I think I have been trained in physiology. I was a performance coach throughout my early years as a law enforcement officer. I did a lot of training and classes for physical fitness, so I was a physical fitness specialist. Actually licensed by the Dallas, Texas. That was more physiological in nature. My degree seeking as a DO of physiology is biological / physiological underpinnings of cognition. Do you have a CV?
I don't have a CV. I've been providing nothing. Do you have a CV?
I do have it, yes. But I have all of my coursework listed there, and I'll tell you.
That might short circuit this if I don't have good access to it.
Is it in your document?
I'm afraid it is, but it's in a digital form, so yes.
Okay, we'll come back if necessary. Does your website, does that list some of the areas of expertise and some of the experiences that you had?
I think so.
May I approach the witness, Scott?
You may.
Okay. And this might be an old CD. This is what I found online. Let me look through this very quickly.
Sure, it's over.
And I made some
Yep.
changes.
Yeah, it doesn't have a coursework, but I do have a percent.
Okay. So this has some of your training, but not everything.
Yes.
Okay. And then this is your website. You said you hadn't viewed it in a long time.
Yes.
Is that just a screenshot and both sides? Your expertise that you offer and some of your training and experience in law enforcement.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna mark this State's Exhibit number 1, and I'm gonna offer it for the rest of this hearing. And defense counsel, any objection?
Oh, yeah, I've seen this website, no objection.
All right, State's Exhibit 91, which I guess are screenshots.
Or screenshots of Dr. Bedard's website.
All right, those are admitted for all purposes. And how many pages is 91?
91 is 2 pages,
Thank you.
and it has to do with Dr. Bedard's expert consultation. Now, Dr. Bedard, here on your website, if you could, I know you said you hadn't looked at this in some time, but if you look at page 1, it starts talking about your level of expertise, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if you could read into the record all the different areas that you offer and have a level of expertise in.
According to the website, police and corrections policy and procedure, use of force arrest techniques, citizen self-defense claims, justifiable use of force, castle doctrine, stand your ground defense, police and you want to do that?
Yeah, all the way through.
Police and corrections equipment training and application, handcuffs and restraints, chemical agents, electronic control devices, batons, and impact weapons, firearms, Fourth Amendment implications on use of force, reasonable suspicion, objective reasonableness, and probable cause. Eighth Amendment implications on use of force, unit of force, cruel and unusual punishment, issues, police procedures, control response to calls for service, suspect identification, field interviews, detention, field training, cyber construct and cyber delirium, academic curriculum, and development, research, and application.
Okay. So I counted earlier 16 different areas of expertise. Is there anything else that I'm missing that you're also an expert on?
I think these are so encompassing that they would be included, for example, getting into citizens, encompasses a lot. But I think, when we talk about combat stress, I don't know that I specifically stated that would be under citizens for self-defense, stress, probably use force. Brain function,
So you want to combat stress specifically, or you think it falls under citizen self?
I think it's interesting.
Okay, anything else? Sorry, I cut you off.
Yes, brain function, very definable.
Okay. Anything else?
I think it's good.
All right, council, if you could please mark your spot. It is now almost 12:29. It is. We've been at it for about 2.5 hours. It is time for a break. We are going to break for lunch until 1:30 p.m. and take up this cross-examination. At that time, if there's any case law that either side wants me to review, I will. I'm happy to do that over the lunch hour. All right, then we are at recess. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Marissa. I know that was a long morning. She usually needs a break after 2 hours. Okay, yeah, me too.
That would be.
Then you were.
You could email it to him.
Yeah.
You just didn't print it out. Hello. Did you need me? Sure, come on up. Sure.
Brought somebody for a break consideration.
Sure.
Reduction. I know you guys allowed this.
That's all right. I'm happy to listen, and we can make a bond decision if you just want to grab somebody other than Catherine and Patrick.
It actually was.
Was it her case?
No, Natasha died. The robbery. Yes. But
Was she on probation or anything?
she is on bond for an aggravated robbery, which is kind of weird. But then she picked up a robbery
Right.
and a criminal mischief and a couple of misdemeanors. My thing was her bond at $40,000. She's pregnant, in jail, and so I was just going to see if the court would consider a lower bond.
Sure, I'll look her. Is it Dial?
Yes, Judge.
Okay, because that name sounded familiar. All right.